Why is inequality very important, even economically speaking? In terms of my leaning politically, I would say I'm center-right. I am also a proponent of enterprise because I think they do something great for the economy. But in terms of equality and inequality, as I have seen very well measured here, even through Gini coefficient, when you have, just to put it in banal terms or in plain terms, when you have 1 million people here, 2 of them, they have, let's say, 2 billion shillings each. And the other ones, they have $1 each. When you are calculating what you call GDP per capita or income per capita, they only take the aggregate, you divide by the number of the people. And I don't think that is a very good representation of the situation. But it is self-feeding. It is a virtuous cycle when it is good. It is a vicious cycle when it is bad. Because when you redistribute the same 2 billion, and the one who have $1 each have much more, and the one who have 2 billion, they are still wealthy but not with so much disparity. What you do is to give the other people also purchasing power. Because economies run on 2 things, production and consumption. If there are no consumers, if there's no purchasing power to the majority, even the producers themselves, they get a drought. So it is important for us to constantly champion for equality, and that is why I commend Oxfam for this event. The second thing I want to talk about is education. As we have seen in the figures here, capitation in our primary schools, because it's primary school that started in 2003 in terms of free basic education, it has been decimated to 18% currently, and especially given on the depreciation of purchasing power since then. The figure hasn't changed, but the purchasing power of that figure has shrunk to 18%. Now, this is the bad news I want to give Kenyans, because part of our work is also to sensitize. The principals in our day schools as we talk today now, and I'm sending my brother PS, and I recognize your presence here. I request you, because you are now the nearest to government in this room, please, it is unacceptable that the government sent a circular to our day secondary school principals wanting to add school fees by 9,000 shillings from January. And I just want to request you, as a member of parliament for Kiharu, free basic education is important even for bridging the inequality gap, for building capacity of Kenyans, and I want to assure you as member for Kiharu, there will be no school fees that will be increased in January as far as we are still serving Kenyans. And therefore the government need to reconsider. Some of these things are not issues of discussion. You cannot take away from Kenyans things that are good. Governance is about progress, not going backwards. You can only add into the gains. And therefore, that issue of the secondary school increment cannot be accepted. The other thing, as you could have seen, we must also frankly interrogate our economy. We talk about factors of production. In our economic classes back then, it was about land, capital, and the rest. But unfortunately, in Africa, specifically in Kenya, and you can attest to this, the most important factor of production currently is political patronage, clientelism. That is the pure truth. And I want you to keep on assessing the kind of deals that are happening in Africa. When you see a multi-billion deal in any sector, either energy sector or any other sector, you dig deeper, you will likely see patronage. And you cannot grow an economy which is not liberalized. We need to let go. Let entrepreneurs do their trade. Let politicians do their work. But we cannot continue having politicians doing both fronts. Now, debt. I'm going direct to the point again because of time. Kenya, I said this in Parliament yesterday, and I want to repeat. Kenya is borrowing, on average, 3.5 billion shillings every single day. Kenya is borrowing 145 million shillings every hour. So by the time you are here in this hall, the hours you've taken, by the time you go, you can calculate how much. Why? In 2022, the debt in Kenya was 8.7 trillion Kenya shillings. Currently, it is over 12.5 trillion Kenya shillings. We have borrowed over 3.5 trillion Kenya shillings. Kibaki borrowed a net of 1.2 trillion in his 10 years. So Kenya is borrowing in a year, what Kibaki was borrowing could have borrowed in 10 years. We are borrowing, let me repeat, 3.5 billion shillings every day. But if you actually take the borrowing for the last 3 months, the first quarter of this financial year, Kenya borrowed around 450 billion shillings. So actually the average in the recent is more than 4 billion Kenya shillings per day. Why is this very important to inequality? Because some of the borrowing we are doing, for sure, most of it is not going into adding utility to the population of Kenya. And the people of Kenya will end up paying in many years to come. I am calling upon Oxfam, please, because you have the capacity. And the other organizations, Irongo, you can organize one. We must have a debt conference in Kenya, where Kenyans must have a voice, because by this trend, we are going to have it very rough. As I come to the finish, please, I'll talk slowly as I finish. Hear me clearly about this issue of debt. Hear me clearly. Kenya is borrowing 3.5 billion shillings every day on average. That's one. Secondly, because people say, oh, Kibaki also borrowed, Uhuru also borrowed. Now listen to this. Besides that borrowing that is in the book, from this financial year, Kenya has also become clever, as Kibaki was saying. And we are now borrowing even off the book. In the book debt is 12.5 trillion. There are other semantics you hear flying around. One is called securitization. Securitization is an illegal debt of 175 billion already taken. It was nowhere in the budget. There's no document anywhere about securitization. The banks who participated, they also need to learn a lesson. That when time for repayment comes, they'll have to look for the people they talked to. If they'll not be around, they know what to do. The second debt that is illegal is called Talanta Board. The stadiums you see, Kenya borrowed 44.5 billion Kenya shillings through a board. But the interest rate for that money in 15 years, the interest rate alone is 100 billion Kenya shillings. That is why the Talanta Stadium you see, we are told the cost is 44.5 billion. The real cost is over 145 billion Kenya shillings. And I challenge anyone, including the National Treasury, challenge my figures. Because as I said yesterday, facts are like a lion. When you have a lion, you unleash it. You don't need to defend it. It will defend itself. And that is what facts do. Now, besides that, borrowing, as I finish some. Now, Kenyans will say, but we see many things, this happening. This is what I want to conclude with. Kenya is borrowing 3.5 billion every day. Is borrowing 1.25 trillion every year. That is the money President Kibaki borrowed in 10 years. But everything you see with your eyes is not part of that borrowing. The Nairobi-Nakuru expansion is not part of that debt. That is your money that you contribute to NSSF. That the government has forced NSSF to invest that money, then they'll collect their money using toll. So we need to ask government, the money you raise through infrastructure board, where is the money going to? Others will talk about Talanta Stadium. Talanta Stadium, as I said, is not part of the borrowing that I have enumerated. That is another illegal debt, as it happened in Senegal in the last term. The smart city you see in Nairobi happening is also not part of your revenue that you generate as taxes. That is money from South Korea. The expansion of Gongo Road that you are seeing, including the many barabara ya gorofa munaona zinajengwa, that is also not your taxes. That is Japanese money. The programs you hear the government launching, including Nyota, that they hijacked the other day, that is also not your taxes. That is money from World Bank. So the question is, as we talk about inequality, The money you are borrowing, where is it going? Thank you very much.